having also relationship with other entities. But again, like the first point about entities in order, in hierarchy, etc., or exploitative relationship. So relationship can be of many kinds. And so those relationships and when we say plurality, consciously we have to know that our goal is to treat each other as equals and therefore see the world as second, see the relationship in the building of one another, and what are the large, small, immediate, remote structures which create those discriminations, those oppressions. We have to transform them, and therefore, in a framework of self and self, perhaps we can plurality and relationality relatively better in our pursuit of social transformation. Thank you.
Okay, before I ask Gopal, I'm going to contextualize my question. I think this is a very important, this was a very important presentation, brief, to the point, and very meaningful for us in our current political predicament. I just want to contextualize my question to Gopal. You know, after the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall, something strange happened to the discipline of political theory. You know what happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall? Federations melted, countries dissolved, and neighbor turned around neighbor with the kind of ferocity we only hear about during the partition. The other day I was reading Amrita Pritam, writing a letter to the 18th century Sufi saint Varisha, saying, Varisha, rise from your grave and see what has happened to your Punjab. You've wept for one woman here, and see what has happened to the daughters of the Punjab. Corpses litter the fields, and the Chenab runs red with blood. She's wrote it in Punjabi, it's been translated. That was the kind of horrors we saw repeated in Eastern and Central Europe. And the agenda of political theory changed. See what an ambitious agenda we had. From Plato to Rawls, it was justice. It was a perfectly just society. And Rawls made it very clear, I'm writing only for the United States, I'm not talking about imperfectly just societies. Now the agenda became, in the middle of the 1990s, how do you create a society where people don't kill each other for the sake of religion? How do people of different persuasions, of different religious persuasions, of different notions of the good, learn to live together in a certain degree of civility, if not harmony? Our agenda has become very noble. Gopal will remember we shared a book, The Decent Society, by Avishai Margaret. And this is what he said, stop talking about justice, let's talk about injustice, let's talk about how people can live together. And this question confronts us today. It has confronted us for the past 9 years. And in that context, Manoranjan's notion, stop thinking of the self and the other, think of the self, the other. What you call the other is a part of you. This is basic awareness. I mean, this is what Gandhi spoke of. Treat others the way you would treat yourself. This is not Christianity. I studied in a Catholic college. We were at school. We were taught, treat others the way you would have them treat you. Now you're saying in advance, treat others the way you would treat yourself. And he sees relationality as a relationship between the self and the self. And I think this is a very, very important contribution. What I want to ask you, Gopal, Can we have a relationship between the self and the self even if we start looking at each other through the prism of an alternative political norm that the Constitution gives us? The Constitution was written in the midst of death and destruction. And yet they gave you the concept of fraternity in the preamble. They gave you an alternative, and I often quote this, if you see a movie called Garam Hawa, which I'm sure all of you have, or see it or watch it on YouTube, I assume it's there. At the end of this film, there is a very meaningful scene when Rajsani, who is owner of a shoe factory in Agra, he's Muslim, Salman Mirza, I think it's Salman Mirza, his second name is Mirza. Salim Mirza. He has to leave the city because everyone has gone to Pakistan, all his family, entire family has gone to Pakistan. And he says to himself, "Kitni der insaan akela reh sakta hai?" So he takes a tonga to go to the railway station, very reluctantly, closes his haveli. And the tonga wala says, "You're a Muslim, double this rent for you. Kiraya, tumhare liye double." And Madrasani is very, very depressed about it. And suddenly the mood changes. What does he see? He sees a procession carrying a red flag with a hammer and a sickle on it. He stops the tonga, straightens his cap, gets down from the tonga and joins them. There is an alternative to Hindu communalism and Muslim communalism. That alternative, I'm not very fond of using fraternity because fraternity is a gender-specific word. We can use the term solidarity, which is what our constitution gives us, and all we're saying is, but can we do this, Gopal, without the notion of power, or without the notion of historical injustice? Can we do it without the context? That's what I wanted to ask.
Ma'am, please put the microphone.
I take this one.
This one, okay.
Thank you, Neera, for giving me some homework. I don't know whether I'll be able to do your homework sincerely and faithfully, but I'll try. You are raising you actually given me a very big task of accounting for the shift, if not paradigm shift, in doing political theory in India. There is a debate on starting off as a Guru project, and as Gurupit will concur or endorse that what kind of language we had in 70s, late 70s. How was political theory defined in CPS, for example, or DU, for example. Actually, we were driven by one set of concepts, and nothing without that, nothing outside those concepts. And I think you know very well, those concepts were the sovereign concept then. And we just couldn't really do anything without those. So we couldn't really smuggle in. And thank you to you, Neera, because you gave me two books. One was Avishai Madre, the other one was Axel Honest. And that is the shift in political theory. The language that we actually transact in the classroom and wrote articles, that language was, so to say, not adequate to understand questions that were they are facing us, but they are not represented in doing theory. So to that extent, there is a shift. And so I think a lot of young scholars have come sitting here. They have to take this project of doing political theory differently, engage with the Biko project, and find out whether we really have any chance of doing meaningful political theory in this country, which actually will give some adequate explanation to our own experience, including different forms of experience. The other problem I would like to put to your consideration about what kind of language will you actually mobilize, conceptual language, to do some theory which will speak to us. If you start with a tautological framework, like for example social justice by Rawls, you may be well informed and you might feel fascinated, but you will not feel confident of telling the should I say truth, maybe truth, political theory actually focus on the nature of politics, and that's why the state becomes so important concept in CPS. And till Gurupit wrote something on the diversity, multiculturalism, and all that. So till then it was all state and class was actually formatting and formulating concept. So I think there's a shift. And so is there a possibility of actually doing political theory differently? If you want to do it differently, what is the starting point? Should we really have one starting point, or there should be many starting points? One starting point, and there's a deconstructionist logic, and I don't want to actually follow that. Neither you will follow that, I know that. So we have to be arrogant at some level. So so what kind of language do you have at your command to really give some visibility, legibility to the concept of political theory? Because the tautological, they already given, running from the top to the bottom, is not just available to us. So we'll have to find out language which is available in the day-to-day practices of the people. And so pluralism is one field of inquiry from where you can actually extract some concepts. We did a workshop on experience near concepts. Now, who's the best candidate? Women are the best candidate to actually mobilize resources, because their experience actually give new concept altogether about which political theory is insensitive. I'm not aware. I'm just provoking. Somebody said sixer nahi maar raha bhai. I mean, I said provokingly that why it is creative? Why it is not critical? So what is the relationship between critical and creative? And we had a chat. So you should ask these questions. Raju Bhargav actually tried to give some understanding of what is relationality, and in his analytical mode he gave different forms of it. And I was asking Manendra, should I really speak today? Because I already spoken something day before yesterday. Anyway, but I'll just quickly, these are all issues we should take on board and responding to your concerns. So I think I just made 2 points. I might make 2 more points. Do I have 2 minutes?
Power and historical injustice.
Yeah, so that's the historical injustice. So taking from Raju, one can say, if you really are asking for a deep relationality, I think then we'll have to go back into the historical experiences that are layered and complex. And you actually have to actually build up your deep sense of relationality, making sense of the historically complex situation that actually have been handed down to us over a period of time. So you cannot be indifferent to the history, like Descartes. You can't be indifferent to the history. You have to actually confront history. So I would say that relationality is a kind of, it's not a literal, it's not something which is literal. I relate to you and you relate to me. It's not relational. It is not even social relationship. The relationship, and just Professor Mohanty has mentioned that point, a relationship. Relationship is some kind of, I think you have to give a name to the relationship. It happens on an everyday basis. And there's a temporality involved in the social relationship. But relationality is, I think, is different from relationship. But temporality is not a part of relationality. And what is it then, therefore? Relationality is a condition, I think, which may historically exist, but it is a condition within which you are, and I hate to use those words, there's some kind of social ontology involved in this. And social ontology is actually of near and fair. You are near to other, you are near to yourself, self and self. And I think here you can also go to Levinas, because in Levinas, the others is reflected in you. And I gave this metaphor yesterday, day before yesterday, of mirror. In mirror, you don't see yourself. You are actually not managing your appearance. You are actually looking into somebody else. who is not present in the framework but present in you. But that's a different thing. I don't think any Marxism will allow that, any kind of radicalism will allow that. I think the alienation point, the language of alienation has become little old. You have mutual reification, and that's the Axel Honneth language. And you are so much divided into, you are reified in terms of caste, in terms of religious groups, in terms of gender, and you are actually frozen into yourself. You are folded into yourself, not flowing. And therefore instrumentally the function of political theory is to make you flowing. And therefore I think you can say you can be creative and also you can be critical at the same time. So I think there is a notion of being near and being fair to oneself. Now, are you are near in terms of emotions? You are near to the experience that the Manipuri women undergone. So you are near to them. You may not physically near to them, but you are certainly in terms of the normative consideration near to them. So near and fair. You have to be fair to yourself in order to be near to them. Let me repeat this one. You can be fair to yourself in order to be near to them. You can be, and you should not be fair to them. But there is no patronage involved they don't require your patronage. Women who are put to some kind of a obnoxious experience. So I think this should be one. Let's take relationality as the moral condition within which we are this. And one last point on pluralism, as a several point, but I'll just take plurality. Now, plurality is it associated with relationality? I think it is not related. If pluralism is so competitive, it's like marathon. Everybody is actually running, and that's why I have a problem with intersectionality. You start from the same starting point of capitalism, and you take different routes, compete to reach the finishing line. You run with your own dukkha, and your dukkha becomes yours and not others. And that's the problem with intersectionality. And I think this we have to sort out, and we have to be very careful, sensitive to see that you just use accurate language, not correct but accurate language. So pluralism will have to be therefore disentangled from intersectionality. There is a competitive mode in that, and then see whether there is some kind of approximated sense of common good. And I'm just repeating this point, which was a point of discussion. And so, to that extent, you have to see pluralism differently, different from intersectionality, and maybe different from, I don't know, should I say multiculturalism? I'm just broken a little bit. So maybe I don't know correctly about it, but pluralism has to be the approximation of all the good points in social groups. But then there's a debate. Communitarian and individualism. The social groups may not, their goodness is not given in social groups. That was the case after that was actually please do it. I'll stop here. I think. Yeah.
You know, we have a very eminent political theorist among us, Gopal. May I ask you, Gopal, to make a short comment? We don't have much time because I think you'd like us to finish by 4:45, right?
We said we have come here really to listen.
Maybe
to
we'll
three of you.
One microphone.
Uh,
ये आपने क्या कर दिया निकलता नहीं बहुत मुशक्कत करनी पड़ती है
I have not come prepared to speak, but I wanted to hear. But thank you to Professor Chandhoke and the organizers, Professor Mohanty and Professor Gopal for giving up their time, which I think would have been more meaningfully spent if we had heard you. I think from what you have both said, and I'm going to sort of take a cue from Professor Gopal Guru first, because he drew our attention to paradigm shift, and is there a need for a different set of concepts? So I think when I think in terms of relationality, I think that agenda comes forward very, very stridently and strongly. Do we need, for instance, what kind of concept probably captures the idea of relationality and brings that up front? And for your submission, I would say, for instance, one such concept would be respect, because it brings a relationship of equality, not sameness. So my anxiety about self and self is just this, that it could be refined, withdrawal into self-contained units who don't speak to each other. But keeping the spirit in mind, I thought maybe we can think in terms of what kinds of concepts need to be put forward in political theory, which privilege the idea of relationality. And I thought respect is one of them, trust is another, and these were certainly not the concept which was center stage in the 80s and 90s even. They have been there now for some time, and even then people wrote about it, but I thought that's the question one could think in terms of for a paradigm shift. What kinds of concepts might we want to bring in, which bring in this element? One other small thing, if you permit, would be, I think I'm not willing to give up maybe self and other as binaries, because it can be an othering, which is a situation of negative stereotyping, of domination, etc. But I want to bring in the idea of difference still in there. I think that's why I think of respect or trust as being central, because you think of someone who is not just a self, but also different. And different from you. Sorry to bring in multiculturalism again, but difference is important. I don't think we should give up, because each individual is also different, and I think that difference also within the group we need to maintain and keep. And then we've talked about, I think the seminars talk about whether it's gender or other kinds of relationships. So there is a difference. I want to bring that in, keep that idea of difference intact, while thinking in terms of, and that's why those two concepts come to mind, respect most of all. So thank you for that.
Okay, just as, sorry. You want me?
No,
Just as, this whole movement to, put the self and other debate in perspective and use the debate to reduce othering and really move towards greater equality and respect and trust and mutuality and dignity was very important. And there are several such concepts. So self and self also will not replace self and other, because just as power structures would always be there to defend themselves, therefore the struggle will go on. And now here there are two things. In fact, plurality is about distinctiveness, specificity of each entity, each individual, each group, each region, the specificity is very important. That's why we moved from homogeneity to plurality, diversity. But the important thing is, for example, culture. I believe that all cultures are intercultural. They have all derived from other cultures. And yet, there is there may be some specificity about certain cultures, certain groups, certain tradition. And again, you have to evaluate whether it is an oppressive tradition or a liberative tradition. So every one of them has to be subjected to that distinction, that assessment. Now, therefore, of course, the whole idea of pluralism is to acknowledge the importance of difference and specificity of each entity. I will just add one point before passing on, and that is about the relationship and relationality. You know, the distinction Gopal was very right. Again, the relationship involves many kinds of, that condition of relationality. It could be, as I said, oppressive, enabling, indifferent, all kinds of, and yet related. They're going together but not talking to each other. It's indifference, but they are co-passengers. But what is important is have to pay attention to terms of relationship. Some grow unconsciously, birth related, blood related, etc., region related, culture related. And when people become conscious of oppressive conditions and want to change that, then you begin to see what is the origin. So Brahminism created certain relationship when they grouped. Whatever British census, when it categorized certain castes, certain tribes as primitive tribes, criminal tribes, and so on, you certainly create identity and then relationship among members of that number. Therefore, there can be a whole range of relationships which have to be tested by the type of relationality and the origins and the politics of relationality. Therefore, while we say all selves are interrelated, they are subjected to the kinds of differences, kinds of relationships which may be oppressive or liberating. Thank you.
Yeah. Can
Okay, Gopal.
I can speak without इसकी जरूरत नहीं.
You won't be.
अच्छा. Actually, technology controls us so much.
We are talking yesterday about Professor Farr was talking about it. Anyway, that's a different chapter. So I think I just make a small point, but which has a larger implication. We have to be. We need not be indifferent to difference. That's the point you are raising, Gopal. If we're indifferent to difference, I think there will be no space for multiculturalism, and multiculturalism is a good, or pluralism is a good. But indifference also carries both positive and negative. At some level, even deeply negative connotation with it. For example, indifference, the way we define indifference, and there was some discussion on indifference day before yesterday in the panel, opening panel. Now, indifference, as I mentioned to you, one was the Cartesian indifference that I need indifferent to. It doesn't really matter to me, the history doesn't matter to me, I'm new beginning. So that's why he's a modern philosopher. But indifference, actually, there was some noise. Somebody shouted from there? No? No. I can be indifferent. No, I think the indifference, and that has some bearing on the student's life, student-teacher's relationship. And I would say relationship because it's interactive. Uh, in indifference of a negative kind, you actually suggest some kind of a perfect notion of equality. And how do I explain that? I explain that when people come to us, students come to us for approval of their thesis, and then you have Rab ne banayi jodi. So you give a particular thing to a particular student. There is a perfect equality. And I wouldn't say gender, I mean, so identity studies, you have different sets of students. There is equality. I mean, it doesn't bother. You're indifferent. You don't want to actually invest intellectually. And you're indifferent to that. So this is one negative. In indifference, you also have both enabling and disenabling. You will suggest what is good for you, what is good for you, what is the good thesis for you, good topic, decide. There is some kind of rationality involved in relationality. So I think this is something which is ethical implications on your relationship. And we actually have to overcome this negative kind of indifference, even the patronizing indifference we have to overcome. And that actually is the bigger challenge with the young scholars and young faculty. We are there, I mean, we are out of the system now. Thanks you invited us. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a chance to really speak to you about this. Do invite us in the future as well. But thank you. Yeah.
I think I'm going to wrap up because it's time for the next session.
Ask the organizers. Ask the organizers.
Let's have at least a round of questions. And if you feel like answering, then we do answer or by delay.
1 minute, then I'll just, may I request, okay, I just want to say one thing, which will probably at another time ensure this very interesting debate, how do you live together in a territorially bounded community? And I would suggest that we start taking our constitution very seriously, and I'm not saying it. I think the anti-CAA movement taught us the importance of the preamble of the constitution. We learned a great deal from young people. When in 1950 our constitution was adopted, it not only established a relationship between the state and the citizen, it also established a relationship between the citizens. We were members of a political community, and I'm one of those who believe that the concept of the nation has to be dumped as one of the major mistakes of history. Because the notion of the nation has had far too many tragedies ever since it was invented. We are members of a political community because we owe allegiance to the Constitution, to our national flag, etc., etc. A bit of emotion here, it won't be too out of place. There is a problem in becoming too rational and too with the neatness of your argument, because a fellow citizen as a human being is extremely important. So political communities are not built overnight. We had a constitution which says fraternity, and if there is one lack in modern democracy, it is that of solidarity. And I asked once assembly, when was the last time Savit's political philosopher worked on solidarity? That's a critical theory, mid-20th century. And in that, if you look at back at India after independence, a whole lot of agents contributed to the creation of this political community, and I can only think at right now of one certain agents, and that was the poets. You look, the poets, the Progressive Writers Association had another channel of influencing public opinion, and that was Bollywood, or what was called the Bollywood film industry. And the one poet who impacted, I really think I'm on a campaign, if anybody deserves the Bharat Ratna, if not Kalyak, at least Sahir Ludhianvi. You know, in 1961, B.R. Chopra made a film called Dharuputra. And B.R. Chopra was a victim of the partition. His brother Shash Chopra directed the film. It's about a young man, Shashi Kapoor's first film. It's about a young man who thought he was Hindu, he's a rabid Hindu, and then he discovers he's actually Muslim. And they show the scene, see it on YouTube, you'll start crying. There are these scenes of horrors of the partition, and for once I didn't mind that crying Rajendra Kumar, weeping copiously as he always did. And the song is, Ki kiska lahu hai kaun mara? Ask yourself the question, whose blood is it? Whose blood has been spilled on our streets, on, you know, what happened in Haryana, what happened in Manipur, what happened, I mean, what has happened all over the country? They are human beings like us, and what is our relationship? We are fellow citizens. We owe obligations of justice to each other. I'm going to stop here, but I am going to add that it is time we start adding a little emotion to political science. We have been too influenced by the sheer rationality of analytical philosophy. It doesn't lead anywhere. Politics, they say goodbye to politics. Because we are not only talking of people relating to each other, we are talking about state power and control over the state. And that is what creates cleavages. That's it, there are pedautia between individuals. And the concept of the nation, who owns the nation. Let's get rid of the concept of the nation, talk about a political community, the repository of popular sovereignty, and then think about, in relation to the state, how these relationships between people can be built up. Somebody raised his hand. I'm going to give you 2 minutes exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm Mallikarjun, a doctoral student at IIT Delhi. I had a couple of reflections on the panel and what was said. I think the problem with the self and self, Professor Mahajan, I think already spoke about it. The second is on this idea of solidarity. I was just over the lockdown, this COVID lockdown, Mahabharat was read and you saw about B.R. Chopra. And that perhaps solidarity is a limited concept for understanding relationality, because it has a sense of, I mean, armies have solidarity and political parties have a whip where
I will disagree. It depends upon how you describe, how you conceptualize.
So
Armies have discipline. Have you ever seen a senior officer being, I'm from an army background, being kind to his junior officer? No, not army.
But I'm not
And
sure.
political parties are all about power. They can't be about solidarity.
So
Please think about it.
the example is sort of in Mahabharata. Is there a space in armies today where before a battle one can ask if you want to join the other side? If you think right is on the other side, you can freely go on the other side. And if you think the right is on this side, you can freely pass over to this side.
Right. Will you finish?
Yeah, and just another thing.
You're giving us an alternative presentation. I wanted you to ask
No,
a question.
no, I had a comment, I said. With what Professor Mahajan said, with respect, trust, maybe also add the concept of conscience to the vocabulary. Thank you.
Okay, 1 minute. No, 1 minute. Charu? Yeah. Nupur, sorry. Yes.
Yes, I have a question from Professor Gopal. So could you please just elaborate on your critique of intersectionality? Because how I understand Kimberly Crenshaw's theory, the first step to understand oppression and in terms of layers of oppression is when intersectionality gives us that prism to understand those layers. And therefore, I think there's still merit in the way, especially in the context of multiple deeper relationalities that we are speaking in the context of India. So, if you could.
Thank you.
Ma'am, this is a question for you actually. I mean, I would love to dispense with the idea of nation itself, but how do we do that? I mean, every religion has a conception of community which includes all of humanity. But no nation ever has imagined a state which will offer at least citizenship, a unitary global state which will offer citizenship of whoever who wants it to do that. So, and it is this idea that actually like makes everybody so passionate that we will exclude this and that and the other, and nobody is passionate about everyone, you know, being treated as you would like to be treated, or you treat the other as, you know. But I was also thinking about your example of Garm Hawa and Salim Mirza, the main protagonist. It was not actually him. I'm sorry, I'm making a correction also, but there's a question hidden there. So Salim Mirza is actually sitting in the Tonga with his son Sikandar Mirza. So Sikandar Mirza and Salim Mirza they're both depressed. And then there's a protesting group of youth which is, you know, talking about unemployment, etc., etc. And somebody from the crowd, young people, Sikandar Mirza's friend, call out to him and say, come. And he looks at his father. The father says, go. And then the Tonga is sent back, you know, with the rest of the family. They don't go to Pakistan. Yeah. Right. Now, what happened to Sikandar Mirza's hope that his friends are calling out to him, so therefore they must stay? And Sikandar Mirza, who's today an old man, who's telling probably his sons and daughters to quit India and go live elsewhere, study, get a scholarship. That's what we are doing today. Leave India. So everybody, compares what we're going through today with emergency. It's not the emergency, it's the partition. It's the partition.
Neera, can I just finish?
There's a gentleman, young man here who's last question, Savita.
So I have a question from you. And you talked about the constitutional value of fraternity and to go towards the solidarity. But it was rightly Professor Dr. Jamila puts on ki now we are in an era of partition, not emergency. And if you remember, in the emergency, we were talking about the constitutional rights. We were going beyond constitutional right. There is something limited, there is something missing in the constitution, which was we were demanding in 70s and 80s. But today we are talking about the constitution itself. That itself is, there is a calls from government itself that we need a new constitution. So my question is about, don't you think this is the time to reformulate the conduits of the civil society, because that this is an era of larger neoliberalism and that kind of politics we are seeing today.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hurry all of you up, but there is another round table. 1 minute. Yes, Savita.
Just at the conceptual level. For the notion of self to self, what is required? Two concepts, additional concepts, I think. One is either we have an expanded notion of self, we increase the capacity for it to sort of consider the other as part of the self, or we use a concept of authentic difference, not only difference, because the discourse between the multicultural discourse basically presupposes a liberal state, and in the liberal state we have just witnessed liberal state changing itself into an illiberal state.
Thank you, Savita. I think this is the theme for your next creative theory colloquium. The last question from that lady. Yeah.
My question is for all speakers, but more specifically to Professor Mahajan and Professor Mohanty.
Wait a minute, Dr. Mahajan was not on the panel. You can't.
She did speak, ma'am. I said all speakers. If it's fine.
She just commented. I asked her to comment. Let her ask questions about all right.
You can answer that.
If she doesn't mind, menu. Yeah.
Question is, could the problem of self other be better negotiated through some notion of multiple subjects? Thank you.
Okay. You know, Manoranjan's concept of self and self and other has been taken too literally. I feel it was a metaphor. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Manoranjan. No, to you. I'm saying it was a metaphor for actually doing away with the notion of otherness, and you consider each other exactly like you. Now, I think it's been taken too literally. There is room for metaphor, even in political science, right?
Yeah,
As long as you're not hard
Mohanty, whether it's not metaphor, is seriously theorizing it.
You know,
Sorry.
please,
More questions?
I'm going to now turn it over to the two speakers, and that's it. It's 5 o'clock, 5:05 already.
I think, see, this concept of self and self is also connected with Swaraj, connected with Ubuntu, connected with Bien Brevet. So several new concepts are coming from different struggles where you try to relate to one another as equals and grapple with the problem of oppression, inequalities, discrimination, and go into the historical origins and the dynamics of that. So Swaraj is not for any exclusive self. Swaraj is for liberation of all, and it's a endless concept of liberation. Same with Ubuntu, that the very concept of self is dependent on I am because you are. Our existence is essentially mutual. So a good living between a human species and nature, the Latin American concept. What I'm suggesting, there was no time to discuss on this, but so the othering which these oppressive systems have developed, and we have big theories, the whole history of last 300 years of knowledge systems, and their conquest. They are built upon accepting various kinds of othering as inevitable, and then try to, of course, tackle that under the concept of sarva, sarva, all, and so on. So, recognizing, respecting the dignity and deserved dignity of each entity, and relating and then collectively participating in that liberation of all. So that is the framework within which, indeed, they are expanded multiple subjects because they are all getting agency to help one another. That's liberation. That's an excellent elaboration of what I have in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Gopal?
Okay, last word. Last word.
I mean, there is some merit to intersectionality to the extent that, it offers some space, maybe discursive space to express one's problems and problems of injustice, for example. But, that doesn't really bring some kind of unity of experience. There are different degrees of, the expressions actually occur with different degree of force. That's my dukkha is more important than your dukkha. It's like, it's marathon of minority communities in this country. So, and what's come was it leads to some kind of self-hatred, some mutual hatred and envy, a negative concept of envy. There are positive concepts of envy as well. Capitalism will always promote that, but we won't take that path because we are communist. At least we can believe to be. So, not communist. What do I say? Oh, anything. And I am not in illusion. So I think that is in its consequences, the truth is that it's not desirable. You actually fight your own fragmented battles all the time, and actually capitalism promotes that. Intersectionality was not the vocabulary that was used earlier during the days when lived thinking was so dominant. And so that is one problem we have to guard against. Otherwise it will lead to some kind of identity things all the time. There's no end to it,
And if you really want to make bridges of solidarity in some loose sense of the term, I think you will have to overcome your own internal. See that there's some morally minimum dukkha you can bring together. And there's some kind of approximate of dukkha. No, mera dukkha jada hai, magar we at some level we actually also share that degree of dukkha, suffering. But that is the, market capitalism is so smart. It goes extra mile, doesn't allow you to actually have that morally minimum sense of dukkha. And that is what you should do. And last point, Varun actually, Varun, you raised an important point in the beginning that, what is the notion of emotion? Is it so fundamental in the rationality or reason? And taking cue from Neera, I think there's some we should give some chance to emotion to achieve some success in terms of mobilizing people who are otherwise so rigid. And when Maninder wrote his chapter on Tulsiram, and we spoke publicly in jail when Tulsiram ji passed away, that women from other castes were actually crying on Murdaya, isn't it? So, but that is, and I would say, that is an initial condition, not the essential condition. I would still say that reason is the essential condition, though morality, moral is initial. Without that, political theory is actually vacuous.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone. Thank you, Gopal. And sorry for those who wanted to ask questions, but here's another thing.
Yeah, that you were fair enough to all of them. Got it? Let me wait. So, go home. Yeah,
Yeah, it's you were speaking now. Yes.
No, that is
No.
Thank you.
No, but you introduced me, you gave me one picture.